Let's talk about Klay Thompson and Paul George. Both are free agents and both are seemingly expected to be playing for different teams next season. I want to give you my thoughts on what would make the most basketball sense for each of these players coming up on this episode right now.
I'm like, yeah, you see it.
Josh, Kobe Bryant is the best scorer you've ever seen.
Point forward isn't a position. Point forward is a skill.
So many people get caught up in what the ball is doing.
Now, I'm all for winning. I'm all for being competitive. But you took it to another level.
Good people, welcome to this episode of the Basketball Society podcast. Before we talk about Klay Thompson and Paul George, two of the biggest names in NBA free agency this summer. If you're new here, if you're not subscribed, if this is your first time on Basketball Society, good to have you here. Welcome. Make sure you go down and subscribe to the channel and stay tapped in for more episodes of the show and even more basketball content that I know you'll appreciate. So let's get into it. And as always, I want to know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about what I think and what you think about Klay Thompson and Paul George as we get into it. Let's talk about Klay Thompson first. So I know it's awkward. It's weird for everybody. It looks like Klay Thompson is parting ways with the Warriors. It is the end of an era. So the three teams that I've seen out there that have been reported as having interest or that Klay might have interest in are the LA Clippers, the LA Lakers, and the Dallas Mavericks. I thought about it some more. At first, I felt like the best possible team. I felt like it was a no-brainer where the best spot would be for Klay based on situation, style, system. I just felt like the Dallas Mavericks would be perfect for Klay. I think when you look at that backcourt of Luka and Kyrie, which brings so much offensive ability and creating and shot making off the dribble, especially, both high level shot makers, it didn't seem like Dallas ever really committed to a catch and shoot 3-point player. Like they had different players who could hit shots at times, right? But they haven't had a shooter, a specialist to the caliber of a Klay Thompson to this point. You always have to improve. You always have to evolve a little bit. Klay Thompson, I feel like, is exactly the right kind of guard that you would want, kind of in between Kyrie and Luka. Like those Kyrie and Luka are so much on the ball, so much creation and playmaking they have to do for others. To be able to make plays for and have as a spot up specialist, someone like Klay Thompson in between the on ball activity of Luka and Kyrie, I think that's exactly the kind of player that they should be looking for. That's a player you can rely on. Like Klay's not somebody you're going to for like volume shots, but he is somebody that you need to have in rhythm of the offense. So utilizing him properly could be a nice a nice pressure release off of Kyrie and Luka. Really, when you look at it, what took Dallas to the next level in terms of their roster during the season were those trades they made, Derrick Jones Jr., PJ Washington, getting those athletes, those long, rangy athletes who can defend, good athletes on the wing. That took a lot of pressure off of Luka and Kyrie because we know that they're not the strongest defenders. So that just rounded out Dallas' roster so nicely. Now, PJ Washington and Derrick Jones also can hit shots. Neither of them are specialists. They're not shooters, but they're guys that can hit shots. And they had other guys that could come in and hit shots. Dante Exum, right? Josh Green. These were guys that could hit shots. Again, not specialists, not shooters. Klay Thompson would come in as the main go-to specialist 3-point shooting option to alleviate off of all the creation, paint touches, off the dribble stuff that Kyrie and Luka do. I mean, I think that would be almost an ideal scenario for Klay, all things considered. Dallas is having success. They're a winning team. They've got other stars. Like, I think that it's hard for me to think that that's not the best possible basketball scenario for Klay if he's going to move on. I do think the Lakers will be and should be a strong option as well. Klay's dad played for the Lakers. I think he has an affinity for LA in general. And And I could see that working. I've kind of low key wanted to see Klay be able to play with someone like LeBron, who is known for really feeding his shooters and wants that spacing and wants those options of guys who can space the floor. So playing with a high level passer and playmaker like LeBron, I think would be great for Klay basketball wise. I think that team, the Lakers, they've been looking for shooting. They've been shuffling between different guards and different wings and different kinds of players. They certainly have been looking for better 3-point shooting as of late. So that would check that box. My only question mark with the Lakers right now could actually turn into something that I think would be a positive for Klay, which is the system. And they just hired a new head coach in JJ Redick. Now, I'm going to talk on another episode with more of my take on the JJ Redick hire for the Lakers. But one thing I'll say here that I think could be a positive for Klay Thompson, what we know about JJ Redick from his playing career and obviously what he values based on the kind of player he was, is shooting. I have to assume that is part of his priority when it comes to his roster and how he wants his team to play. Now, of course, you have to adapt and adjust to your roster, but we're in the offseason right now. So we'll see what kind of potential tweaks the Lakers might look to make. And I'm not saying they're just going to turn into the Warriors or the Celtics and start shooting a bunch of threes. I just think the kind of stuff that they're running and the kind of players that they're looking to add or change or play more, whatever the case, the kind of lineups they go to, I look to see JJ Redick incorporate a little bit more of a 3-point shooting system and free-flowing culture with the Lakers offense. That's just part of what I expect to see based on who JJ Redick was as a player. That sounds like something that would be of benefit to Klay Thompson. That sounds like the kind of atmosphere that he would thrive in. So LA, his dad played there, the Lakers, LeBron's there. I think the Lakers would make a lot of sense, especially if JJ Redick is looking to kind of pitch to Klay on some, hey, we're about to start running an offense that is way more suited to you. And that's kind of the last thing I'll say about Klay, which is going to be interesting because he has developed his identity, his championship identity, his high level identity as a player, as a splash brother. And that's not to say that his success is attributed to Steph. It's not to say that he's not going to be a great player without Steph. It's just that we haven't seen that yet. Not only have we not seen it yet, but Klay and Steph, I mean, you got a nickname, Splash Brothers. Like, there's so much significance to that. You weren't just a duo. You weren't just a big two. You weren't just the best shooting backcourt. Like, we gave you a nickname. You guys worked together better than maybe any backcourt ever because of your, like, just where you guys met in terms of your shooting ability. Steph obviously got into more of his bag in terms of off the dribble 3-point shooting. Klay a little more catch and shoot, but both just went completely nuclear when it came to their abilities as shooters. And they've been playing together all this time. Seeing Klay outside of that, separate from that, it is going to be super strange, not just like the different colors and the different jersey, but just you want him to be somewhere where he is still an integral part of that team and that system. And it's going to be interesting to see how much of that he can be separate from the Warriors, where the system was literally, manufactured around him and Steph. They became the Splash Brothers together, so, he's not going to form a new Splash duo elsewhere. But, again, when I look at personnel, Luka and Kyrie, Kyrie's a high level shooter. Luka, high level, I would say shot maker as opposed to just like shooter. Luka's just a high level shot maker in general. But these are guys who hit shots. These are guys who enjoy shooting, knocking down shots, and being in that kind of environment, just in terms of abilities and shooting. When I think about where would be best for Klay, I can't help but think Dallas because of that ability. They've got guards that hit shots. They have almost everything else on the roster: bigs, defenders, athleticism. Not to say that just plugging in Klay is like, okay, now they'll win it all. Now they're a championship team, but that would make them better. Adding Klay to what Dallas has right now would certainly make them better, add an element that they didn't have before, and maybe it would get them over the hump. I don't know if Klay does that just by himself, but he certainly makes a team that made it to the finals this year. Even if they got smacked up by Boston, they were in the finals. They made it out the West. It makes that team even better, gives them another weapon to use, and I think that system and culture might be the most ideal for Klay when I look at the teams that he's considering. So let me know what you think. Where do you think Klay Thompson should go and will sign in free agency, assuming that he is parting ways with the Warriors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. You know, the Lakers were brought up a lot. If Trae Young was playing with LeBron and AD, imagine how confident Lakers fans would be out here, LeBron fans would be out here, that they could go for another ring. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like, put Trae Young in that type of situation and we're talking about danger zone. So I should have known better than to record this episode the day before free agency, but Paul George, as of last night, he is signing with Philadelphia. I had some initial thoughts about him signing with Philly or the Magic, so I'll take out my thoughts on Orlando and we'll just get into my initial thoughts on Paul George with the 76ers. Let's get back to the show. All right, so Paul George is a little different case because little more talented, little closer to his prime. I mean, if you talk to a basketball player under the age of 21, Paul George is one of the greatest players of all time. But from a talent perspective, obviously one of the top, 15 to 20 players in the league. One of the elite wing players, wing scorers, one of the elite two-way players, of course. And the two teams that are reported to have interest in Paul George, or that he would have interest in to meet with in free agency, are Philly and Orlando. First off, pretty interesting, and I think it would be pretty cool to see Paul George back in the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference, to me, is just getting even more interesting. And so if we were to pluck Paul George out of the West and bring him back over to the East, he used to play for Indiana earlier in his career, that in itself, I think, would be interesting and would just shake things up. And I think that would be pretty cool to see Paul George back in the East. Philly's kind of weird for me. I can't really get too much of a feel on what I really think about the Philadelphia thing. I guess because even when I've seen fans and heard Sixers fans, some people want Paul George. They want to make sure they get him. They feel like that's their last chance. That's their last hope. That's the only elite level player, top tier level player that they can add this offseason that seems to make sense, that could improve their team. So I see some Sixers fans embracing it. Some of them are like, I'm not crazy about Paul George, but let's just get him anyway. I see some Sixers fans pushing back, saying they don't know if that puts them over the hump. Paul George, he's not a proven championship guy. And like, it's weird. I kind of see it on both sides. I can't really get a true feel for how that team would look to me. But all in all, at the end of the day, Sixers fans, if you get Paul George, there should be no complaining. I mean, if you're not crazy about it, you don't have to you don't have to act like you just got LeBron or Giannis or something. But Sixers fans you've been putting up with Tobias Harris, and I'm fine with. I'm not a Sixers fan. You guys seem to be going through it over having Tobias Harris on your roster. Those same Sixers fans, if you were to acquire Paul George, please, try to just accept your blessings. I said this when the Knicks went and got Jalen Brunson instead of Donovan Mitchell. I said this when Dallas added Kyrie Irving, made the trade for Kyrie. It's sometimes you got to keep it this simple. First of all, you need talent to win. You need talented basketball players. Paul George would be the most talented wing player the Sixers have had since maybe Andre Iguodala, off the top of my head. I don't know. I mean, you've gone through several lead perimeter players as far as a top level guard or wing player. You had Jimmy Butler. He's out of there. The Ben Simmons thing, disaster. James Harden came through. I never thought that was going to work. There were moments, but you would have needed prime level James Harden for him and Joel Embiid to just run through the East and really be a title contender. I never thought that was it unless you got a prime level James Harden and that time was past. And Paul George, I don't know if he takes them over the hump either, to be perfectly honest. Like, I love Tyrese Maxey there. I think Paul George would be, again, the best wing player, period, the Sixers have had to work with. To go from a Tobias Harris to a Paul George should sound like heaven to any Sixers fan, no matter how you feel about Paul George. Like, I get that he's not a championship caliber player. He hasn't proven to be a player who can lead your team or even be the number 2 player on a championship team. He hasn't proven that yet. I get it. But if we're just looking at basketball and talent wise, Paul George versus Tobias Harris, that is a major come up, period. So I think any reasonable Sixers fan should be thinking, man, if we can get Paul George in free agency, no matter how you feel about him, why not? Why not add more talent? Like, again, him by himself, may not have you thinking, oh, we got Embiid and Paul George and Maxey. We're winning the East. No, it doesn't give you that assurance. But what move would, right? What do you want? LeBron? You want Giannis? You want Tatum and Brown to just come over to Philly? Like, what one singular player would even do that for you guys anyway? Paul George, no fan in their right mind should be upset about adding a top 15 to 20 player onto their roster. And I don't think most Sixers fans are. I mean, there's no way to know for sure. I'm sure there are plenty of fans who are for it, maybe some who are against it. But at the end of the day, if the Sixers add Paul George, that makes them really interesting, much better than they've been as of late. He would be better. The Sixers would be better off with Paul George than they ever were with Ben Simmons, than they ever would have been with James Harden, in my opinion. I think Paul George, in that culture, I think he would take it seriously. I think he would embrace the culture. I think it would be interesting to see Paul George back in a role where he is the primary perimeter guy, the primary wing guy. When he signed up to play with Kawhi on the Clippers, he signed up to be the number 2. Kawhi was above him at that point. He led Toronto to a championship. I do think it would be cool and interesting to see Paul George step up back into a role of leadership as the primary perimeter guy, as the primary wing guy, the go-to guy. And again, I understand concerns if you want to question how that translates into winning basketball. But I do think at the end of the day, like I said it when the Knicks got Jalen Brunson, said it when Dallas traded for Kyrie. Be glad that you're getting a more talented player than what you had before. Just be glad for that and figure it out on the other side of it. Would Paul George give Philly fans this championship assurance? Like, yep, we got Boston, we got Milwaukee, we got Miami. We're better than the Knicks. Would Paul George do that by himself? Maybe not. But I feel Paul George just is a different kind of player to affect winning than, even though he hasn't won, than someone like James Harden, than someone like a Ben Simmons. I mean, Ben Simmons was kind of his own special case, but like Paul George, what he does on the basketball court can contribute to winning. It's not about him. It's not about him being the person who's responsible. You already have an MVP level player, a big man. By the way, we haven't seen Paul George play with that level of a big man since, Roy Hibbert in Indiana. And we know Hibbert wasn't on Embiid's level, especially offensively. So that could be an interesting thing. Like, why not see what that looks like? That, to me, adding Paul George would put Philly into the legitimate mix of Boston, Milwaukee, Miami. I'm not that confident in Philly with just Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid as your cornerstones. Embiid is in his prime, MVP caliber. He's also got the health stuff, of course. Like, everything always comes down to that when it comes to Philly. We know that. But even when healthy, like Maxey and Embiid, that's a great duo. I love it. But Maxey is still young. He's still coming up, learning the ropes. Embiid is in his prime now. The Sixers without Paul George, I'm barely, I think they're a good team. Nowhere near a title contender to me. With Paul George, now I'm looking at you as, with the right stuff, If with that team healthy, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, listen, anything can happen. The NBA is fluctuating right now. There's super parity. Like nothing is guaranteed. With Paul George, I'm taking Philly way more seriously. No question about it. Thanks for watching this episode. Make sure you leave me a comment down below. Tap in and subscribe to Basketball Society for even more content from the channel and episodes of the show.